philosopher, Professor Nejime from Gakushuin Women's College. The title of his paper is Humanism, Platonism, and Aristotelianism in Japan's Christian Century.
Thank you very much for introducing me. My title has 3 topics.
In the afternoon question.
My title has 3 topics: Humanism, Platonism, and Aristotelianism. Therefore, one may think that I begin a promptu rakugo story based on 3 subjects. No, I don't tell you a comic and funny Japanese story. 3 isms mean here the Renaissance culture and philosophy totally, while Aristotelianism represents the authority of university supporting the theology. Platonism and its doctrine teaches the immortality of soul to the people of the age of the Renaissance. Humanism in those days expresses studia humanitatis, in which are normally included 5 materials: grammar, rhetoric, poetry, history, and moral philosophy. I would like to select the theme of Platonism and Aristotelianism and address a philosophical, theological aspect of Japan's Christian century. The doctrine of the human soul's immortality. Christianity arrived in Japan by way of European missionaries, among whom Francis Xavier, and Alessandro Varignano were prominent. They were active in Asia, namely India, as Professor Igawa Kenji said to us, and Japan, India and Japan, in the second half of the 16th and in the early 17th century. Xavier reached Japan in 1549, and Varignano followed him 30 years later in 1579. It is possible to observe Japan's Christian century receiving multi-layered influences of Western culture and philosophy through them. In what follows, I will address Xavier, Varignano, and their attitudes towards the human soul's immortality in light of the historical and intellectual backgrounds. Xavier and Varignano were Jesuit or member of the Society of Jesus, a religious order founded in Paris by Ignatius Loyola, together with Xavier and 4 of their friends in 1534. Xavier was Loyola's closest friend and classmate at the University of Paris, the conservative theological center of Northern Europe. Loyola and Xavier, both Spanish, were students of theology there for a long period. In 1537, they left Paris from Venice, Venetia, hoping to visit Jerusalem as pilgrims with their comrades. This attempt was unsuccessful, so they decided to go to Rome to pay homage to the papacy. Their society was recognized as a religious order by the bull Regimini Militantis Ecclesiae of Pope Paul III in 1540. Zabel becomes the first Jesuit missionary sent outside Europe to propagate the Catholic faith. When he arrived in Japan, he hoped to visit five universities in the imperial capital of Kyoto and elsewhere, and to dispute theological and philosophical matters with local scholars and intellectuals, as in he lived in Paris. He was not successful in finding such institutions, all the more that Kyoto has been devastated by continual wars, the age of Sengoku Jidai. All over Japan, where he could travel, Zabel managed to carry out a series of serious debates on a key issue, the immortality of the human soul. Not only Zabel, but also later missionaries emphasized this doctrine. Indeed, in Kagoshima, Zabel once had a friendly discussion with bonds of Zen Buddhist sect Zen, advocating of the mortality of the human soul. The bonds told him that death is the end of every human being, and there was no afterlife. Zabel was also surprised to observe the locals' misunderstanding of the Christian deity in Yamaguchi. They identified the immortal God of Christians with a Buddhist principle being called Deus in Japanese. Zabel knew the situation and took the Deus as a prime matter in Aristotelian terminology, prima materia. To eliminate the prerogatives of this kind of misunderstanding, Zabel decided not to translate his terms of Christianity, such as God, angel, and soul, any longer. Instead, he directly adapted Western terms in the evangelical mission in Japan. This doctrine of the human soul's immortality became a principal feature of his teaching, of Zabel's teaching. To understand the European context of the doctrine of human soul's immortality, the University of Padua held the key. Padua was one of Europe's most important learning centers for philosophy, medicine, and law. It belonged to the Republic of Venice, which was a free and powerful Serenissima country. Before the doctrine of the human soul's immortality became prominent in the broader philosophical scene, the theory of the intellect's unity was taught at Padua's Faculty of Arts. This Averroist unity of the intellect did not acknowledge the immortality of the individual human soul. Bishop here, Pietro Barozzi, as My colleague Sakamoto spoke yesterday about Pietro Barozzi. Bishop here, Pietro Barozzi, was not happy with this Averroes doctrine. He preferred the teaching of Florentine Platonist Marsilio Ficino, who advocated the human soul's immortality in his masterpiece, Platonic Theology, Theologia Platonica de Immortalitate Animorum, published in 1482. With the effort of Barozzi and others, the immortality of the human soul was adopted as the article of the faith at the Fifth Lateran Council in Rome in 1513. Here is its degree from Apostolic Legiminis. I quote, "We declare that all those who cling to erroneous statement of this kind, that is to say, the rejection of the immortality of soul, of the resurrection of body, and of the eternal rewards and eternal punishments, thus sowing heresies which are wholly condemned, should be avoided in every way, and punished as detestable and odious heretics and infidels who are condemning the Catholic faith. Moreover, we strictly enjoin each and every philosopher who teaches publicly in the universities or elsewhere that when they explain or introduce to their audiences the principles or conclusions of philosophers, where these are known to deviate from the true faith, as in the assertion of the soul's mortality, or of there being only one soul, or the eternity of the world, and other topics of this kind. They are obliged to devote their every effort to clarify for their listeners the truth of the Christian religion, to teach it by convincing arguments. Here the task of philosophers is clearly determined. The degrees seem to have been influenced by the revival of Platonism in Quattrocento, Florence. However, before and even after that year, 1513, Pietro Pomponazzi, student at Padua in his youth and professor at Padua, Bologna and Ferrara, Pietro Pomponazzi defended possibility of the death of human beings, individual souls, on the basis of Aristotelian philosophy and reason. Among his students at Padua, there was a future Cardinal Gasparo Contarini from a noble Venetian family. He was sympathetic to the Society of Jesus, the New Order, and did not accept the theory of his master. Contarini respected Pietro Barozzi, the Bishop of Padua, when he was a student there, and Contarini wrote the Immortality Animae. Contarini literary activity began in 1517 with two tracts. One dealt with the duties of a bishop, while the other was written answer to the famous On the Immortality of the Soul by his teacher Pietro Pomponazzi, who sent his treatise to Contarini shortly after its publication in Bologna in November 1516. Contarini's Libri was his only work published during his lifetime. Pomponazzi answered with the Apologia in February 1518. Now, let us turn to the second major figure of Jesuit missionaries in Japan, Alessandro Barignano. He was born in Italy in the town of Chieti in 1539. At the time, this religion was part of the kingdom of Naples under Spanish rule. The Adriatic Sea connected this country, Paese, with the Republic of Venice. Barignano then went to Padua to study jurisprudence under the aegis of the Republic. He graduated with a degree in law in 1557. Later, he was remembered for his ability to settle legal issues that occurred in Japan. Like Xavier in India, Barignano founded a collegio on the basis of Studia Humanitatis in Japan and introduced the Buber type printing here from Europe. To grasp Barignano's philosophical tendency, it is important to examine his university education. To this end, I would like to point out characteristic feature of Padua. It is well known that medieval and Renaissance universities in Europe consisted of 4 faculties: arts, law, medicine, and theology. At Padua, arts and medicine together formed one faculty, while both canon and civil law represented another faculty, along with notarial arts. Generally speaking, faculties of theology were non-existent in Italy, unlike Paris and Oxford. In addition, the Collegio Romano was founded as an educational center of the Jesuits in 1551. It became the largest and best-known institution of higher education in Italy. In 1556, Pope Paul IV conferred on the Jesuits the right to award doctorates in arts and theology to its students. However, this institution was not a university because it neither taught nor awarded degrees in law and medicine. At Padua's Faculty of Arts, students learned the philosophy of Aristotle for medicine and practical sciences, not for theology. The teachings they received can be characterized as wholly secular. It was often called secular Aristotelianism to reflect this distinctive feature. Barignano's consciousness of 3 Aristotle principles of learning, that is, authority, reason, and experience, is prominent in his writings. Here, authority means the philosophy of Aristotle and the commentators, but this authority was not absolute for Barniano. Facing the unfamiliar traditions and the customs of Japan, he emphasized reason and experience, degrading learned authority and abandoning preconceived opinions. In Paris, Zabel studied scholastics and Thomistic theology based on Aristotelian philosophy. At the same time, Lefebvre d'Etaples, disciple of Ficino and Pico della Mirandola, was trying to establish a new interpretation of Aristotle, colored with mysticism. Interestingly enough, acknowledging the Lateran principles, apostolici legiminis. Zabel was also influenced by Renaissance Platonism. In response to the Buddhist negations of the afterlife in Japan, he emphasized the human soul's immortality conforming to the Catholic article of faith. Barniano, in his turn, studied law at Padua, where the secular Aristotelian tradition of logic and reason was dominant. Aristotle remained vague about the human soul's immortality, and his commentators did not fully establish the human soul's survival after death. But Barniano emphasized those points in his Catechismus Christianae Fidei. Barniano respected Zabel as a spiritual guide and described Zabel's life of virtue and ardent apostolate in his work, Indian History. Nonetheless, he also criticized it for tolerating the credulity of people who construe extraordinary natural events as miracles. In this case, Barniano can be regarded as a good disciple of Pomponazzi for the denial of such events as miracles. Perhaps Barniano also would have known the idea of Ficino, according to whom miracles occurred less frequently in his age than in antiquity. Barniano was convinced that a plausible explanation of these phenomena was required in order to persuade non-believers, even if such a theory was not based on Ficinian Platonism. Barniano's Jesuit companion, Pedro Gomez, a Spanish Aristotelian, earnestly taught the human soul's immortality at Japan's Jesuit Collegium in the late 16th century, as is shown in his work called Compendium. He vehemently criticized Buddhism according to his interpretation that the religion of Buddha regarded the death of human souls as being quite natural and inevitable. On the basis of Christian dogma, missionaries such as Zabel, Barniano, and Gomez tried to impose the truths of Christianity and the correctness of doctrine of human soul's immortality on local people's mind. The so-called Christian century in Japanese history ended around the middle of the 17th century. The country completely closed its doors to clergymen and laymen from the Catholic countries of Southern Europe. only the Netherlanders were allowed to carry out their business for 200 more years. However, Japanese intellectuals could read the works on Christianity in Chinese translation from the first half of the 18th century on. Among these works, there were very important treatises: The True Meaning of the Lord of Heaven, composed by Italian Jesuit Matteo Ricci. Leading the Christian mission in China, Ricci expounded in this work the difference between Christianity and other local religions such as Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. Barniano knew his talented disciple well, since he went to Ricci's hometown, Macerata, as a rector of its Jesuit college. The work another Italian, Giulio Areni, follower of Ricci and Barniano, was also translated into Chinese and imported to Japan. Ironically, Hirata Atsutane, 1776-1843, Hirata Atsutane, one of the most important Japanese philosopher and Shintoist of the 19th century, learned Christian ideas through their Chinese translations. As is seen in his work, Honkyo Gaihen. Key ideas such as human soul's immortality and survival, along with reward and punishment to the afterlife, were integrated into his own interpretations, Japan's native and traditional religion, Shintoism. He also edited the treatise, The Tale of the Reverse Katsugoro, which tells a story similar to that found in the Anecdote and Legend of Ficino. These Christian Platonic elements were just some aspect his multi-layered philosophy. Posthumously, his eclectic synthesis of ideas had a considerable impact on the nationalist Shintoist ideology behind the Meiji Restoration in 1868. The latter replaced Tokugawa shogunate, which had condemned many Christians to death. That's all. Thank you for your kindness.